I've tried about 50 different ways of writing this video. Back when I spoke about the demo, I said I'd maybe circle back around to the full game around its release, and I fully intended to. But here we are, a year out from Infinite Wealth's release, and I still hadn't fulfilled that. I had tried. Many different takes of the script were written up, but none that I were entirely happy with. I had an almost 35-page script that really delved into the individual chapters and the nitty-gritty of what I felt they did right and what they did wrong, and how both Ichiban and Kiryu sides of the game affected me in different ways. But I ended up feeling that that video being upwards of probably 2 hours long might not have been interesting for most people. I'm just some dude, and while I love this series, I don't really know if I have the ability to actually cohesively write my thoughts out in a way that is digestible and fun. This video is late, and I know people probably have heard enough opinions about Infinite Wealth at this point, but I'm still going to at least try and go over what I enjoyed and what I didn't enjoy about Infinite Wealth. It's been stuck in my head ever since I beat it. Like a song you just can't get rid of, or how every night I go to bed thinking I should go do another run of Balatro. Let's get this thing started, I guess. I feel covering the gameplay first is probably the simplest endeavor. While I found the demo version of the game to be a marked improvement over Yakuza Like a Dragon, hereafter referred to as Yakuza 7, I found the actual full game to be leagues ahead of what I expected. In the over 80 hours I've played of Infinite Wealth, I never found myself getting bored of the random encounters thanks to the gameplay. Being able to actually properly move around and use objects in the environment goes a long way to making the game feel just better to play overall. Plus, the smackdown mechanic makes bumping into low-level enemies a breeze. Whenever I found myself getting a little bored of a certain gameplay style, I'd have unlocked a new job and I'd usually try it out and find it works rather well with my team's composition, or at the very least was fun to try out. Something I noticed in Yakuza 7 was that, especially for the female characters, there was like one job that was the best. And once you found it, there was no reason to really swap off of it. Whereas with Infinite Wealth, you might find one job that, yeah, it's the best for this particular character, but there's alternatives that might work better for your team's composition overall. I think what inherently helps this system is skill inheritance. This was something that was sorely missing from Yakuza 7 that is added to Infinite Wealth. Being able to use samurai skills on Kiryu while he's still on the Dragon of Dojima job is great. Or being able to put Chitose in a more DPS-focused job while still retaining healing skills from some of the healing jobs just really opens a lot of interesting avenues for player expression. If there's one complaint I could say, though, is that I think Kiryu's starter job is just so miles and leagues ahead of any other job that I never swapped his job for long before going back. Same of Ichiban's hero job. But every other party member got their job swapped multiple times throughout the game. I also think it's a missed opportunity to not give Kiryu a second job similar to how Ichiban has freelancer and hero. Something like Agent, inspired by the gadgets from Like a Dragon Gaiden, would have been potentially really cool, especially with the Spider-Man-esque wire gadget he had in that game. But sadly, due to the nature of Gaiden's development, I can see why it wasn't implemented, but it would have maybe been cool to see it in a post-launch, like, DLC, free DLC preferably. I also just think the variety of jobs this time around is a lot more interesting than Yakuza 7. Stuff like the cowboy-inspired job, the samurai-inspired job, and the American football-inspired job live in my head rent-free. They're fun to play with some really funny and just fun-to-use skills. With this being RGG's second outing of the gameplay formula for this particular set of the series, I'm more confident than ever in the series being turn-based going forward. Yakuza 7 had me concerned a bit, considering by the time I hit it, probably around the halfway point, I didn't want to see a random encounter, because the gameplay was just starting to drag, and they managed to actually fix that in Infinite Wealth to such a degree that I just want more, and more, and can't wait to see what they add in the eventual Like a Dragon 9. And as we approach the end of the combat portion of this video, I will say that I do think features like Kiryu being able to break out of turn-based mode and go into a brawler-like mode is really, really cool. Though I think everyone who knows about that, especially since it was advertised, already thought it was cool, so it's more like a yeah, no shit kind of opinion. Tag teams are really neat as well. I like that they're almost like S-Crafts and Trails where they need to be built up to, but deal with really great damage and look pretty cool while doing it. Although, they are locked behind the bonded drink link system, and while that does make sense, it means you might end up with certain party members, especially late-game party members, that might not get a chance to have their tag team used unless if you go and grind out their bond to unlock and then view their first drink link quick. It doesn't take much time to do, at least, but it's something to keep in mind, as I found the story really hits its peak right when you get some of your last party members, so I can see where a few players might just keep doing the story if they're really engrossed in the plot. I will say, I'm not really sure how I feel about the bond system at large, since it does tie into quite a few features like skill inheritance slots and, tag teams and stuff like that. I didn't find it particularly egregious, so it might be okay. But you might have a different experience with it than I did, though. The ultimate tag team where everyone jumps in, provided everyone's hype meter is charged up, is cool though, so it's worth making sure you get every party member tag team as soon as possible. Anyway, I think I've ran out of things to say in regards to the combat, so let's talk about exploration. I think Honolulu is actually probably the best looking RGG Studios map so far. It's memorable as well, which helps, although perhaps that might just be because it's an American location in an RGG game. It's vibrant, and the different parts of it actually do feel relatively unique from each other. And I do appreciate as well that if you're playing in Japanese, that the enemies still do speak English. It really makes you feel like you're in America when you're a foreigner walking the street and hearing a 6'4" white guy call out to you and say, "Hey asshole," and then proceed to attempt to beat the shit out of you with a tire iron. Fun fact, by the way, but Jack from Stranger Paradise's voice actor, Mosian Melvin, is listed under additional voices.
Chaos.
I do think Ijincho still does look nice, but I just don't find it as memorable as a place like Kamurocho or even Sasori. Maybe that's because we haven't had many games there yet, but I just don't find myself thinking of particular landmarks like I do Kamurocho of the Red Gate or Sasori of that giant crab. When I do think of Ijincho, I think of maybe the bridges with that water beneath them or that one adult store you go to. It's a bit of a silly complaint, but I do find myself thinking it sometimes when I reminisce on both 7 and Infinite Wealth. I appreciate the additions they made to free roaming in the game as well. The Segway is actually really smooth to control, and it's really useful for just gliding around and taking in the sights. And the CD player that allows you to play music as you roam around makes even just walking enjoyable. When it comes to the mini-games, I think they're probably the best it's been in the series. The karaoke is the best it's been since probably Yakuza 5, maybe? I don't know if I'd say it's the best, but I'd say it's at least really high up there for me. And on a good day, it probably does beat out Yakuza 5. At the very least, I think the song selection is excellent across the board. And the new Uber Eats minigame is a blast. And I do think Dondoko Island is actually really entertaining as a time sink. Definitely kept me around for a while. The only one I didn't play a ton of was Sujimon. It's a fun parody, don't get me wrong, and there's nothing really wrong with the minigame itself, but it just didn't really grasp me like a lot of the other ones did. Perhaps it's because I'm not a huge Pokemon or monster collecting game sort of guy, so I'm not going to fault the minigame on that one. It's more on me. Still though, the dialogue for the story related to it has some moments that made me laugh, and it's enjoyable overall. I just didn't end up finishing it. Speaking of Pokemon, they straight up copied Pokemon Snap. It's pretty fun actually, I didn't think I'd enjoy it, but I did. Also, the dating minigame is entertaining, though I felt it didn't have a ton of depth or enough of a reason to keep me wanting to do it. There's probably something else I'm forgetting to mention here, but Infinite Wealth just has a huge plethora of minigames and side content, so forgive me for blanking on a few. And also forgive me for not having super deep thoughts on a few. I just think overall they're fun and good additions to the game. Sub-Stories are pretty good too, as expected. I think there's some real winners here, and I do appreciate the Kiryu side content that reminisces about the series up to this point. As somebody who's been with the series for a long time now, thinking about the days of playing Yakuza 1 or how during Black Friday of 2018 I managed to snag a 4K television on a deep discount, as at the time I was working at Walmart. And at the time I was playing Yakuza 5 for the first time and had saved just before the actual finale of the game. I got my brand new 55-inch 4K TV installed, hooked my PS3 up to it, and played Yakuza 5's finale on it. Getting a chance to experience that game on a big old 55-inch TV, since my older television was just a standard 32-inch 1080p TV, was awesome, even though the 4K TV really doesn't do much for the PS3 for obvious reasons. It just takes me back to the periods of my life when I experienced these games and the memories I share of those days. I do think your impression of certain side content in the game will vary, however, due to that nature of it. A lot of it seems reliant on your own history of the series, or at least your understanding of these characters' pasts, especially Kiryu's. I just don't see everyone resonating with the memoirs or some of the Kiryu side content if they started from 7, or have only played maybe like one Kiryu game, and that's fine. A majority of the side content does go to Ichiban, so it's not like it's the end of the world. Drink links are nice too. They do a lot of expanding some of the newer characters and exploring relationships with characters who previously didn't have any with each other, like Kiryu of Nanba. I'll go into more detail on my thoughts on these later because I do feel they tie into rather spoilery subjects, but I'll just say I think they're overall great, even if I do feel that certain elements of them should have been weaved into the main story. One other thing to touch upon quick is the grindable dungeon design. I actually found it to be better than 7's iteration of grindable content. There's 2 dungeons, the one in Honolulu for Ichiban's party and the one in Jincho for Kiryu's party, and I found they're worth doing as you progress the story. I didn't find they overstayed their welcome all that much, and they're nice for nights where I was just playing the game and not necessarily progressing the main story. However, I will say that I found the general concrete vibe of them to be rather bland. The bosses at the end were fun and sometimes batshit insane, but the floors themselves I feel we should have seen different tile sets. As it stands, the floors kind of blended together and they didn't really take advantage of the character of the cities they're based in. But at the very least, you don't spend very long in them. I think overall it took maybe 2 hours of my playtime. However, I will say that I think Infinite Wealth is actually better balanced than 7 was, whereas in 7 you randomly hit the notorious Wajiban Saijiba wall and it practically forced you to do the grindable content, as the grindable content is only unlocked right before that if I recall. I find XP distribution to be relatively good in Infinite Wealth. I never felt like I was being forced to go grind, but instead I ended up grinding and actually out-leveling some of the game at points because I was just having a good time with the game and engaging with almost all the content. Although, if you focus like basically just the main story, I found XP distribution for just the main story to be a lot better this time than 7's was. Overall though, I think Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth's gameplay environments and even side content is a marked improvement over what came before. With RGG working on Project Sentry and other titles like Virtua Fighter, I'm very excited to see what the future holds for both the studio itself and Like a Dragon as a series, because when Like a Dragon 9 comes out, I foresee even more improvements being made across the board, and that fills me with real excitement. Honestly, this is about to be an ice cold take, but I think Infinite Wealth's soundtrack is probably in the top 3 of the series for me. There's a lot of memorable songs here, and the way they're used is, for the most part, wonderfully executed. Yamaya's theme in particular lives in my head about as rent-free as Kiryu's weird-ass haircut does, which is to say it occupies my thoughts about 10% of the time in any given week. But even the normal battle themes are a bop. I think it's awesome that Kiryu has a different normal battle theme than Ichiban. It's something the Trails series did in Trails into Reverie that I thought was real cool, and it's neat to see Infinite Wealth do something similar. Kiryu's theme is more almost classic Yakuza in sound, whereas Ichiban's is more modern Yakuza in sound. I think the OST weaves these two sides of the series' audio identity in such a way that I walk away from it with a real appreciation for the work done. There's a couple of tracks that weirdly only play once and in odd areas, but I'm not going to say that's the music team's fault. When it comes to the localization of the game, I think it's relatively solid. I played Yakuza 7 in dub since there wasn't many scenes with returning characters, and I figured I'd give it a shot and found the dub to be rather excellent. The localization changes in the dub were superb, and I found at times the lines to actually be snappier and hit harder than the sub version, since the scripts between the two were at times completely different. When it came to Infinite Wealth though, especially with it having a focus on Kiryu, I did end up going with sub this time around, which I found to be as immaculate as usual. I don't think there's been a single Yakuza game I could think of in modern times that have had an iffy localization, except for maybe some of the issues with the remasters. I went back and played the first few chapters in dub, and I think the casting is great like Yakuza 7's dub was, but I did find myself, like most, just not resonating with Yang Ye's portrayal of Kiryu. I don't think he's a bad VA, nor do I think he's an awful Kiryu. I actually think he's rather talented, but he feels a little miscast here for such an older Kiryu. I think he'd have made a great Yakuza 0 Kiryu, though. He's got several moments I do think he delivers a great performance, but I don't know. He doesn't get across the old man with cancer tone in a way that resonates. Perhaps this is my feelings on the Japanese version clouding some of my judgment on the dub this time around. I do think both audio tracks have their upsides and downsides, and you can't really go wrong with either one, because the entire cast is a tour de force. Danny Trejo, Daniel Day Kim, and Alex Lee as new characters in the dub, while you got Takahito Koyasu rejoining the cast in the sub as Yabai after playing a role as the villain in Majiba's Yakuza Kiwami 2 side story. However, there's more than just one dub this time around. There's also a Chinese dub of the game, something I believe is a first for the series, and I find it to be rather good. However, I'm not a speaker of any Chinese language, so I should clarify that I'm playing it by ear here. A Chinese viewer might be able to chime in regards to its overall quality, but I found the casting direction to be strong, with the overall voices to fit the respective characters. I can't really go too in-depth on this one though, as I'm not too familiar with the Chinese voice market. It's something I've dramatically overlooked over the years.
なるほどな。確かにお前はそのなりが似合ってる。
何の因果かまたこのメンツで始まるんだな。
こういうのな腐れんっつんだ。
正直言うとさ、俺は心のどっかでこの日を待ってたような気がするぜ。
You're right. Bringing the old suit back was a good call.
I know, right? Gotta say, it's funny. The three of us kicking things off again.
What did you expect? We're in it for the long haul. If I'm being honest, I think part of me's been waiting for this day for a long time.
原来如此啊，确实你还是比较适合这身装扮。
不知道这算什么缘分，重新开始居然还是我们几个。
这种就叫做难解开的孽缘呢。
说句实在话，我觉得我内心的某个地方其实一直在期待着这一天。
When it comes to how long this game is, it can vary on if you want to hammer in side content. My total playtime for Infinite Wealth sits at a healthy 61 hours, however, I did spend about 5 hours doing side content after beating the game. I believe I finished at roughly the 50 to 55 hour mark, and that was with doing all of Kiryu's side content, but only a little bit of Ichiban's, and then just beelining the main story until the end. This is easily a 100-hour game, if not slightly more if you're going for everything. But it's also not a huge drag in my experience. Those 61 hours flew right by, and I enjoyed every minute of it. As for what platform to play it on, I think pretty much every platform is relatively great from my understanding. I played the game on PC of a Ryzen 7 950X3D, RTX 4090, and 32 gigs of DDR5 RAM. And as expected, I had a great experience. But the console versions are good from my understanding. You could buy the game on PC, PS5, PS4, Xbox One, Series S, and X. The PC options for tweaking the graphics settings are relatively extensive, with support for DLSS, XESS, and FSR3. It's also Steam Deck supported. It's hard for me to gauge the performance you might have on your system considering the build I'm running, but I found the game to be really stable and perform relatively well. I think I only had one crash that was more of a freak incident than it was the game itself. One last thing to quickly talk about before we move on to the story is the DLC practices for this game. Infinite Wealth has quite a bit of DLC, although some of these are basically just boosters to speedrun your progress through the game or stuff that adds flavor to Dondoko Island. But others include stuff like the aforementioned football job and a tennis job. I feel like locking gameplay stuff like jobs behind DLC is just quite frankly really stupid. I'd bet a good 70 to 80% of people that have played this game have probably never even played those two jobs. But I can tell you they're really fun, just not worth the $5 they're asking for it. Also, $2 for an Ichiban outfit that is in the game, in the cutscenes and stuff like that? Really? But one of the more egregious DLCs is the one everyone most likely already knows about, which is the one that adds New Game Plus. But I actually want to very quickly focus on the bonus dungeon, which is unlocked in Premium Adventure after beating the game, the Big Swell, which is included in the DLC that includes New Game Plus. I found this to actually be pretty entertaining of a story, even if the gameplay itself is nothing to write home about. Although the dungeon included is at least, has character unlike the base game dungeons. Everything else they're selling is for the most part a fluff piece, but New Game Plus and additional, even if superficial story content being locked behind $20 DLC, is just goddamn stupid, and shouldn't be supported. Thankfully, it seems like they've realized that locking New Game Plus behind DLC shouldn't be a thing, and that Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii will have it in a post-launch patch. Although, now that I think about it, why didn't Gaiden get New Game Plus in post-launch patch? Whatever. Still, shitty DLC practices, and if that influences whether or not you buy the game, at least you're well aware of what's going on. With this being the first mainline entry since the depart of Toshihiro Nagoshi, I will not lie, I was a little concerned. While I don't think every entry in the series has been amazing, I do think the series has flourished under Nagoshi's leadership. The torch for leading the series was passed on to Masayoshi Yokoyama, who's had a history of the series dating all the way back to Yakuza. He did a lot of script writing work for the series, having not really missed any mainline entries. Honestly, it's rather impressive. With his promotion to director, scriptwriting this time has been spearheaded by Kazunobu Takeuchi, with assistance from Tsuyoshi Furuta. Furuta's first foray into the Like a Dragon verse was one of my favorite entries, Dead Souls, where he was the writer of it and has been involved with most releases since. Takeuchi, on the flip side, has been with the series about as far back as the original Yakuza 2. He has been involved with story writing periodically throughout the series, but he was never the lead, so this is really his first foray into headlining a mainline title. While I will say that I'm confident in the series going forward under Yokoyama's leadership, this entry ended up being a mixed bag for me. On one hand, I think parts of it are some of my favorite writing in the series thus far, and some of the best dynamic intros. But on the other hand, I think some of it is some of my least favorite writing in the series thus far. I'm gonna delve into the nitty gritty of what I liked and what I didn't like, so if you're watching this hoping to not get spoiled, then feel free to skip this part. I won't blame you. My overall opinion is that I think this game is worth experiencing, but there's a lot of caveats to that. Feel free to skip to here if you want to see the next segment. I think the game opens very strongly outside of instantly dumpstering Psycho for the next 20 to 30 hours, which in my opinion is a huge shame because she was one of the highlights of Yakuza 7. I'm just mixed on the whole Ichiban falling in love with Psycho thing too. I don't hate it, don't get me wrong, but I hate the execution of this entire plotline. I feel it should have been better built up. I know someone will hit me with, well, Yakuza 7 was the build-up, but I feel this could have been a part of Ichiban's B-plot for the game, and to some extent it is, but him developing an actual honest-to-God romantic relationship with Psycho throughout the game, instead of him bubbling their first date in the opening, and then the consequences and feelings with that being only offhandedly mentioned about 5 times, and then coming to a head right in the finale, would have just felt better. The fact that Psycho just disappears from Ichiban's life effectively after the aforementioned bumbling leaves a terrible taste in my mouth. And even the finale doesn't address it correctly. All of this just doesn't feel well built up, and the execution is just overall messy. I know some people will probably say that the series hasn't done the greatest of jobs with female characters in the past, and I won't entirely disagree with this sentiment. But I think they've also given us great female characters. Hell, even San-hee in this very game has done well. The inherent issue is that until Yakuza 7, they didn't really get much time to shine. And then we got Psycho, who was genuinely great throughout the entire game. And all of that gets thrown away in Infinite Wealth to some extent when it comes to her. So yeah, I think the handling of Psycho was a mistake. But I do think she's still as great as she was in Yakuza 7 when she does finally link up with Kiryu's side of the story. It just takes a while for her to get there. The parts of Nanba and Adachi trying to help Ichiban with his relationship are heartwarming though, so it's not all bad. It builds upon the relationships established in Yakuza 7 in a fun way as a game opener, but it falls apart right away as we hit the actual date, sadly. So let's focus on Ichiban's side of the story for a bit. I felt that there was actually a lot of positive things going on with it, and he remains a great character, though perhaps a little undercooked for what is his second outing. I like the idea of exploring the concept of Yakuza reintegrating into society and how their past continues to haunt them, especially when the game decides to bring Sawashiro back and having him attempt to atone for his mistakes in the past. It actually gives new life to that character to some extent. I didn't exactly find him one note in Yakuza 7, and usually the series does bring people back out of nowhere sometimes to mixed results. But I will say that I found Sawashiro returning to be a net positive this go-around, although revealing he didn't actually kill Hoshino in Yakuza 7 is a little silly. Let characters be shitty. It's okay, the series is about the criminal underworld. The reason I say this is because it have made him coming back and actually meaning to atone even better, and make the audience think he genuinely is just going to be an asshole again when it looks like he's allied with Ebina. Him actually meaning to atone is cool though, especially of how he wants to right some of his past wrongs and send Ichiban to meet his biological mother. And in turn, 100% confirming to Ichiban that good old Arakawa is in fact his biological father. And I do like how Ichiban is shown to be relatively popular and well-liked across the board, which makes sense considering his personality and the fact that what he did in Yakuza 7 is known about in town. I like that his reputation isn't one built out of respect for his raw strength like Kiryu's reputation as the Dragon of Dojima, but rather that his reputation is more about his kindness, helping people around town. He lives up to his title as the hero of Yokohama, but the moment that the Tatara channel uses her mass following to frame him in a negative light, public opinion shifts against him and then goes after people connected to him. He might be a hero thanks to his past, but that can easily just be yesterday's news. He could be tomorrow's villain. Jesus Christ, I'm a terrible writer, I'm sorry. I enjoy the exploration of how our society will on occasion just jump to a conclusion because certain popular people said so without thinking about the facts themselves, or even just looking into the story at large. It happens a lot, especially on platforms like Twitter. This isn't me saying that all popular people use their platform to put people down or that everyone is ignorant and just goes with what popular people say. I do think that there are great people out there that use their platform to at least prop up facts and showcase those that are doing good and bad in our world. So I thought it was interesting that Infinite Wealth wanted to try to tackle this angle in the story. I think it's a worthwhile endeavor to at least explore the idea, but the execution falls apart as the plot goes on. Although the plot opens with the Tatara channel and date stuff, following the reintroduction of Sawashiro and the introduction of Ebina, we're off to Honolulu. Ichiban's life might have been ruined thanks to the internet, but family takes priority. Ijincho still gets the spotlight in this game, but we have a new setting for the second Ichiban story, and I like Yakuza going to America. I remember people joking for the longest time that it'd be really funny to have a game set in Texas or something like that of Kiryu. We didn't quite get that, but we've come close enough that I'm happy about it. I like that despite having his life ruined, Ichiban isn't going to go seek out the Tatara channel for revenge, and ends up instead heading out to see his biological mother and ends up meeting some folks along the way. Of course, things don't go his way, and in traditional Yakuza fashion, we end up in the shit. I will say though, our initial antagonist setup in America is great. The Yamai Syndicate are established as a threat pretty quickly, with the Barracudas joining the fray pretty soon after them as well. The cards end up stacked against Ichiban as he searches for his biological mom, and I like this vibe honestly. Our hero is a bit lost and aimless. He knows what his goal is, but he's a foreigner in a foreign land, and things just aren't going his way. Tomizawa treated him a bit like shit, Chitose drugged and dumped him. I actually kind of like the idea behind Yakuza maybe tackling other organized crime other than just, well, the Yakuza and surprise secret Koreans. I also like the idea of multiple factions that aren't related to each other all tying into the overarching narrative. For these first few chapters, it feels like there's a lot of cards at play and we've not seen the whole deck. I think Infinite Wealth has one of the stronger starts of this series because pretty much all of these early chapters have an interesting plot hook to keep you going. That's not to say the series at large hasn't had great opening chapters, but they do tend to drag quite a bit. And while Infinite Wealth is definitely the same case to some extent with the bulk of the actual non-story content unlocking in Chapter 5, I do find the early plots of the game still engaging quite a bit. Plus, I just love the reintroduction of Kiryu and how they instantly start to build his relationship with Ichiban past him just beating the shit out of him in Yakuza 7. I think this is great. We see Kiryu in a different light thanks to him becoming a member of Ichiban's party for a bit in the game. I'm sure some longtime fans of the series might be exhausted of Kiryu, considering he's literally not missed a single game so far since he was still in Yakuza 7 to some extent. But I find the exploration of Kiryu in Infinite Wealth to be such a refreshing take on the character that it's really not exhausting. If anything, I think just like Sawashiro, it breathes new life into him in ways I didn't think were possible. Ichiban really feels like the type of character that Nishiki could have been had things gone differently back in the day. He feels like a younger brother to Kiryu, and I just love that dynamic. And I hope we get to see more of it in the future, but I have a suspicion we probably won't. I do find that Ichiban's story starts to fall apart rather quickly the moment the story shifts to Palakana and Bryce. It's revealed that pretty much every faction except for Yamai is related to Palakana, and later on that includes even Ebina and his business in Japan. I felt that Wangto and the Ganzi are set up to be relatively cool. Everything surrounding the casino infiltration into Wangto's badass dynamic intro is great, and he does start to set the stage for the future, and at the time you're like, okay, this is getting really interesting. Maybe this guy is going to be a party member. He seems pretty shitty, but maybe he can turn his life around. And then he just does nothing and dies despite looking like he's going to amount to something. His son gets captured as well, and saving him is literally irrelevant to the plot. Which I do find strange because Kiryu and Ichiban hear about a kid being captured and basically dismiss it until Ichiban stumbles upon him in the finale. They mentioned searching for him, but for something that seems like it'd probably be pretty important to these characters, ends up being irrelevant, which just feels like this plot point should have just not existed at all. This starting to have everything except Yamai related to Palakana is also a bit lame in my opinion. Hell, it's almost like John Wick in the way that in John Wick practically everyone are assassins. Well, as it stands, practically everyone in Honolulu are involved in Palakana. I get to some extent that there's supposed to be a mirror here to Yakuza 1. Instead of looking for his long-lost lover, Ichiban is searching for his long-lost mother. He ends up needing to protect a young girl in the same way that Kiryu ended up needing to protect Haruka. Everyone and their mother and their mother's mother and their mother's mother's grandmother wants the young girl's head, and it's up to the protagonist, in this instance Ichiban, to bring this entire thing to a close. It just doesn't really work. And I also just don't think Bryce is an interesting villain. They made the weirdest decision possible by having Bryce's Japanese actor Toru Furuya speak broken English in every cutscene, where Bryce speaks English. It's just odd, because Dwight actually has two English actors. Danny Trejo in the dub, and then Maxwell Powers in the Japanese sub for whenever he speaks English. Maybe this is to make it come across as Bryce being a bit more alien and strange to the audience, as they do try to imply he hasn't been aging at all, but they don't actually do anything with that plot point, and technically Ichiban beats up a geriatric since he's 90 years old. But the character himself just isn't interesting. it just feels rough, and that's a lot of the Palakana stuff, in my opinion. Exploring the idea of a cult being the ultimate big bad is inherently a bad idea, but I just don't like the execution of basically every antagonistic faction in the game being related to them. Having Palakana be the endgame is fine, but I feel like Ichiban could have used either a bit more time with his biological mother, or Lonnie, the girl that he set out to protect later on, to give the audience more of an actual reason as to why Palakana and Bryce have to go down, instead of the nuclear wasted Palakana inheritance subplot that ends up being the crux for the ending. As it stands, Lonnie and Akane, Ichiban's biological mother, don't get a lot of screen time, and it's hard to feel attached to them like Haruka. They don't really feel like actual characters, and you just don't really end up feeling like you care about why Palakana has to go down. You just know they have to go down, because if they don't, bad things will continue to happen. At the very least, I feel the plot in Yakuza 1, which this does parallel, hits the ground running on building the Kiryu and Haruka dynamic, whereas Infinite Wealth doesn't build much of a dynamic between Ichiban and Lonnie, or even Ichiban and Akane, as much as I feel it should. Ichiban himself feels a little stagnant. That's not to say I don't think Ichiban as a character moves forward at all. I think he does grow to realize that while he can open his heart as much as he wants, people will still hurt him, and it's up to what he does to protect himself in that heart of his that matters, so that it doesn't turn to stone. But yet, he'll go and make the same mistakes with Psycho right at the end that he did at the start. It just makes me sigh a bit. Ichiban's story suffers a bit due to being what I think is more of a transitional story. The series is now moving away from having the Yakuza central antagonists in every entry, so they tried something a bit different here. It sort of feels like the ending to this whole, what I'll call the Yakuza Farewell trilogy, which is Yakuza 7, Gaiden, and Infinite Wealth. And due to that, they want to set up the future while also letting go of the series past, and in an attempt to set up the future, they wanted to try to break free from the traditional mold with Ichiban's side of the story. Instead of fighting the Yakuza, you fight a cult, and while I might not like Palakana at large, I can respect the attempt at trying something different. I can see where there's seeds of good ideas here. Ichiban's mother being involved in the cult would have been interesting if they actually had her maybe be on Bryce's side, and Ichiban had to confront that and in turn her. Or maybe give that idea to Lonnie and have Ichiban build a dynamic with her to showcase that there's more to life than just the cult. Instead, Lonnie and Akane are just against Bryce because Lonnie is the true inheritor of Palakana, and that Bryce is a piece of shit. The story feels like growing pains in the same way that Yakuza 7's gameplay felt like growing pains. The series wants to move away from its traditional stories and try new things. It's not always going to work out, but considering how many games deep we are now, it's something they do need to figure out to stop things from feeling samey. I suppose we'll see how Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii shakes out to see if breaking free from the mold is truly going to work out for the series, since that seems like it's going to be something a bit more fresh. But honestly, my biggest problem with Ichiban's side of the story has to lie with the plot twist of Eiji Mitamura. Not even Bryce, though I don't think he's particularly great either. And while I think some of the Palakana stuff is undercooked, this shit with Eiji is just straight raw. I get the idea of what they were going for, a man who manipulates Ichiban's undying good nature and uses him to achieve his revenge. If Ichiban is Jesus, Eiji is to be his Judas. But after his betrayal, he proceeds to go on a shitty spree, and you confront him in the club, Chitose has her big moment, and then he's effectively removed from the main story until quite literally the end credits. For someone who's set up to be one of the big final antagonists of the game, he actually doesn't really do anything after his big moment, which is weird, considering he's actually pretty involved with the plot up to that point when he's pretending to be your ally. Once he's a villain, though, he's just there as a vessel for Chitose to get her moment and to be a showcase that Ichiban will always try to meet someone halfway, even after they've hurt him, because he believes in the good in people. He doesn't feel like an actual character, and that's honestly the biggest problem with him. He's died Ebina in this very same game with Ebina. He too hates the Yakuza due to being hurt by, you guessed it, what he believes to be the Arakawa family. Because practically every villain so far in the Ichiban set of games needs to feel like they got screwed over in some way, shape, or form by Arakawa. Something I hope and probably will be abandoned post-Infinite Wealth. He even went so far as to be a member of Bleach Japan during its heyday, and once it collapsed, he used his background as a reporter to use the Tatara channel as his mouthpiece and twist the news. He could have actually been an interesting antagonist, because he's in truth a civilian dragged into all of this. But he also could have done with a few more extra scenes after his betrayal to set up the ending a lot better. If he's to be the mastermind behind the Tatara channel screwing the party over again and again, why doesn't he get more focus, considering he ends up kickstarting practically the entire plot? Hell, he's the one that gets Wangto and Hanawa killed. I guess they wanted to pose it as that even he was getting played by the true masterminds behind everything. But he just doesn't get enough focus after his betrayal to really have a satisfying conclusion. You don't even get to confront him again after the club, he just shows up at the end. It's just very, very unsatisfying. Let's shift our focus briefly, though, to the new party members, Tomizawa and Chitose. Despite some bumps in the road of the plot, these two are real winners. I wasn't the biggest fan of Chitose for the first several chapters, but I came around to her and her banter amongst the party. Though I think a lot of that is due to the party chats around Honolulu, which went a long way to endearing me to her instead of the main story. As in the main story, I didn't find her all that interesting. She spends the first chunk of the game as a will she or won't she betray the party, and technically she sort of does actually betray the party a number of times, and due to her indecision ends up being partly responsible for the death of Wang To and Hanawa. I think once she gets past the hurdle of her story being dragged down by AAG's bullshit, she becomes a lot better, though. It's only a shame that it happens to be so late in the game that she only gets a few chapters to really start to shine. Although I do find her ending to be a little odd. After everything that's happened, her ending up as the chairwoman of her family's group is fine, and maybe they're going to use that to bring her back in the future, but it doesn't feel quite like the right fit for her. I do like her using the Tatara channel to expose Bryce, though. It's a nice touch in the end. But when it comes to Tomizawa, he's actually a standout in the game the same way that Namba was in Yakuza 7. He's practically a replacement Namba for this game, as Namba is more on Kiryu's party in this one. Though you do still feel the brotherly love between Namba and Ichiban. I like Tomizawa. I like that he's not the biggest Ichiban fan from the get-go, or rather doesn't feel like trusting him right away. And I like how conflicted he is throughout a lot of the game, and I hope he continues to be relevant in entries going forward. Although he is a likeless character, so I guess we'll see what happens there. So yeah, there's actually still a lot to love on Ichiban's side. Yamai in particular is a standout. I love Tomizawa's struggles with Yamai at first, but I also love how the more you interact with Yamai, the more you get to see layers to him. He's still a piece of shit, and at least the game owns up to that, and doesn't entirely shy away from it. But he's not as reprehensible as the story presents him as right up front. He's got a code of honor and plans to stick to it. I didn't think I'd find myself enjoying him as much as I did, but wow. I actually walked away wanting more of him despite him having like 8 different boss fights. Overall though, I do think the new cast who get a focus are a win. When it comes to Drinklings, pretty much all of them in this game are winners, and I still do love the concept of having characters bond over drinks. It feels real. But I do feel characters like Chitose and Psycho need more time to cook in the main story proper. There's a few things in their respective Drinklings that I feel should have been incorporated into the main plot, as this is technically optional content. Chitose's is complicated because I feel like her relationship with her parents should have been better explored in the main story because it ties into her being blackmailed, and her Drinkling goes into that a bit more. Psycho gets a Drinkling in Kiryu's side of the story that has elements that I feel are pretty essential to her character this go-around. Her frustration of how things worked out with Ichiban, how she's approaching life right now, all of that should have been worked into the main plot instead of being relegated to content some players might just not touch, and in turn end up walking away feeling like Psycho is just really one note this time around. I know that unlike Ichiban's side, Kiryu's side of the story lies mostly with Kiryu, not with his party members. They're just there more for the ride on that end. But I don't know. I feel like some of this still could have been weaved into or expanded upon more in the main story. I will say that I do like how even the returning characters you get Drinklings with Ichiban specifically actually do get new and interesting ones. They don't feel like repeats from Yakuza 7. Adachi's is great because I think he's a great character, and I'm glad they've kept him around, and his new avenue of a plot is pretty good, like starting a security company. Han Jungi is even better than his previous, because I like that he seems more comfortable in his skin and around Ichiban, plus we get to learn a lot more about him. It's just a shame he's introduced at the 11th hour, so you might not be seeing some of what I think is his best writing so far. I will say that I do at least like the final stretch of Ichiban's story, as much as I don't really vibe with Palakana as the main antagonists. I do think the final dynamic intro for Ichiban goes hard, and I get why Ebina isn't his final boss. I know some people feel that the bosses should have been flipped. Ichiban fighting Bryce still works though, there's a lot more at stake here than just Akane and Lani. He's also fighting to protect the home of someone like Tomizawa, and I think thematically that Bryce works better for Ichiban than Ebina does. Ebina is more of a representation of the Yakuza sins, something that Ichiban doesn't really have a connection to, since by the time he's introduced, the Yakuza are on their way out and practically gone. So Ebina works for someone more like Kiryu. If Ichiban is to be the hero of today, he needs to fight the problems of today and not the problems of yesterday. So it works, even if I don't really think Palakana and Bryce are well done, and I don't think the motivation is quite there to really feel like you're fighting for something important, it still works better as a final confrontation for Ichiban. Ichiban's story could have been great, but I'll say that I think it's at least good. At some points better than Yakuza 7, and at some points about as bad as some of the lowest lows in something like Yakuza 5. So it's a bit like a heart rate monitor, up and down and up and down. It's stable enough to be enjoyable though, and still well worth the experience of playing. On the flip side though, that does leave us with Kiryu's side of the story, which makes up a decent amount of the story's runtime. Surprisingly, Kiryu's back as a protagonist in this game. I honestly would have been fine if he didn't even have the cancer plotline, it was just a party member who mentored Ichiban in this entry, but nope. They gave him a terminal illness and used it as a vessel for, in my opinion, one of the more interesting Kiryu stories. Though, I'm going to be honest and say perhaps there's a bit of a personal bias here. I myself, early last year, shortly before this game came out, was diagnosed with what looks to be an incurable stomach disease that is slowly killing me. I was given about a few years before I might need to live off of a feeding tube, something I'm still coming to grips with. I haven't stopped fighting, and I spend a lot of my time every year in medical facilities, but it's why I feel this side of the story resonated a bit more with me. I'm walking in the shoes of a character whose journey that I adored growing up. One who's been, to me, a shining beacon as to what a man should be. Caring, kind, and yet still strong. He's got his flaws, but Kazuma Kiryu is one of gaming's greatest protagonists. He feels like an actual human being. So the cancer plotline resonated within me. As someone like the Dragon of Dojima who can have a terminal illness, anyone can. Shit, Majima even basically says that when they meet again. But that doesn't stop me from thinking that I think this is actually really quite silly to some extent that he got cancer for being Donkey Konged by a radioactive barrel. Really? Really? Not the 40-something years of smoking cigarettes? Okay, whatever. So Kiryu's got super cancer this time and has 6 months to live. And the story does showcase him being weaker, even if gameplay-wise, that homie's the strongest party member God's ever graced a JRPG with. Holy shit. But I think the story taking him in this direction is great. Kiryu's been a man to fight his battles alone, but this time that's just not on the cards. He has to learn that life's a lot better when you have those to share it with, not just the good times, but the bad times too, and this is an amazing lesson to impart upon the audience, but also makes my heart feel warm to see this character spend time with characters as friends and not just as allies. But at the same time, I actually really liked Like a Dragon Gaiden The Man Who Erased His Name, which came out a few months before Infinite Wealth. I thought it was a great Kiryu adventure, one that honestly left an avenue open for them to do maybe more interesting stories still with this character if they wanted to keep using him. Kiryu's spy adventures sound like a fun spin-off series, and I really like the characters established in Gaiden. And yet, Infinite Wealth was clearly written before Gaiden, with Gaiden being written after. Pretty much everything set up in Gaiden is irrelevant to Infinite Wealth, which should have probably been held more against Gaiden than Infinite Wealth, but it still warrants attention. Hell, I'd even say that I think Hanawa and Kiryu's relationship in that game is completely irrelevant to Infinite Wealth. Hanawa dies at the same time as Wang To, and it just gets brushed over. Gaiden hinted at Hanawa most likely being Yu Morinaga, and I just don't get why we don't get any closure to that, or really anything at all. Kiryu just says he was only his handler and leaves it at that, which is odd because it felt more like they were friends by the end of Gaiden. Maybe Hanawa will return in the future and they'll address some of the dangling plot threads he left in his wake, but as it stands, it just feels weird. Like, why write Gaiden that way if you already know Infinite Wealth is written this way? It feels like the teams between the two games didn't really share stuff back and forth, so it just feels like Gaiden, outside of being really cool and a fun story, is just completely pointless. And yet, I find myself thinking that Kiryu's side of the story is great and a stronger showing than Ichiban's. The Yakuza are effectively dead, the Tojo Clan HQ even burns down in this game. Kiryu's a relic of a now dead world, and yet he chooses to continue to live on for those whose sacrifices got him to today. Ebina and those who serve under him wish to tear down everything Kiryu's ever built and loved, and yet Kiryu does still stand. Because it was never about the places, or even the organization, but the people within it. Although, I do think having the 3Jima security organization that was set up in Yakuza 7 fall apart off-screen due to Ebina's machinations is just quite frankly lazy writing. The scene between all of them and the boss fight that ensues is great, don't get me wrong, but you're telling me that these three, two of which have been protagonists in the series, got bamboozled by Ebina and just decided to pack it in and go fish? Really? I just don't buy it. It feels more like an excuse to not have them involved more in the plot and to up the drama when the Tatara channel exposes them all together. But I just love seeing all these characters on screen together, so I don't entirely hate it. Anytime the story focuses on Kiryu's past and touches upon the lives he's impacted, it makes me wonder about the lives I've impacted throughout my life and my choices. But I will say that I do believe Daigo Dojima probably needed some more focus. He should have gotten it back in Yakuza 6 when 6 decided to go with the ending where Kiryu feels like Daigo's his son to some extent, and Daigo even acknowledges Kiryu as his father. They have not really shared a good on-screen moment together since then, and I feel like that relationship could have been touched upon a bit more here. It's not, which is a shame, but what's there is nice, I guess. I wish some of these returning characters got more screen time, and that's why I love the Kiryu side content that focuses on characters from past games. Seeing the boys from Yakuza 6 or even the taxi driver guy from Yakuza 5 really does tug on the heartstrings. Or shit, we finally get to see Akiyama again. But at the same time, I just don't think they go far enough here. The Daidoji Boogeymen actively hamper what should be a celebration of Kiryu's life, especially if this is going to actually be his last game. Although we've heard that one 100 times before. Kiryu basically getting to interact with all these characters, bar Akiyama and technically Kashiwagi, at a million miles away just feels bad in ways I'm not entirely sure I can properly get across. It makes sense for the story, don't get me wrong, but as a longtime player of these games, I feel like my joy of seeing these characters again was being held back to some extent. Perhaps that's the point, and I can sort of see it. If you're a longtime player, you, like Kiryu, are excited to see these people again, see how they're doing, and you want to interact with them like the old days, and yet you can't ever go back to those days. Time has passed you by. It's time for you to move on and continue onwards in the present. The Yakuza are dead and buried now, even though I get the feeling that a future game will somehow manage to dredge them up again. And even if it takes the Dragon of Dojima's dying breath, he intends to at least take on their sins. It's a great idea, honestly. Especially to bring Kiryu back, and I cannot praise the idea behind the story enough. It's Kazuma Kiryu's version of Logan to some extent. It's melancholic in nature, yet so full of heart. I couldn't get enough of the Kiryu story because it felt like a true goodbye in a way Yakuza 6 didn't to some extent. It wasn't just the end of Kiryu's saga, it was the end of everything we've been seeing up to this point, and yet, as I mentioned a moment ago, the Daidoji boogeymen are lingering over the story, and I just don't feel like they do anything remotely interesting in this game or pose any actual threat in a way that makes them feel needed for the plot. I get that due to Kiryu's circumstances post-6, they needed to address this, but considering Kiryu's introduction and the fact that the Daidoji just flat out didn't really care all that much about Ichiban's party knowing about Kiryu's identity and stuff like that, it really makes me feel that they didn't really have a point in existing at this stage. Which, I mean, hey, they end up not mattering at all outside of the side content a bit, so maybe this is a bit of a moot point, and maybe Like a Dragon 9 will tackle it. Maybe they're the next big bad. One thing I like to rave about, though, is that I do really enjoy Kiryu's party. Much like Ichiban's, I feel the party fits Kiryu perfectly, and it's crazy to think that this is the first Kiryu game where this dynamic is actually explored, and it's all the better for it. Treatment of Psycho on Ichiban's side aside, I think she really shines here along with Sonhee finally being playable and becoming more of a central character thanks to Kiryu's story. I love that Sonhee is a Kiryu fangirl, much like I'm a Kiryu fanboy. I can relate to it. But what I really want to just talk about quickly is that the drinklings of characters like Namba and Sao are excellent. It feels like they really end up connecting to Kiryu on a personal level, and Kiryu making promises to do things with them when all this is truly over warms my heart. I came to care about the relationships these characters have and wanting to actually see Kiryu fulfill these promises. I think it's just written excellently, and it's a shame it's relegated to side content, because I think Kiryu's ending almost doesn't hit without the context of the drinklings. I do think having these characters that weren't Kiryu's allies in the past walk alongside him this time does a lot of helping for those who may have not played every Kiryu game. They get some exposition periodically to help make things make sense for them that serve as brief summaries of events in Kiryu's life that if you've played the respective games you would know about, but otherwise you may not. Plus, I think it does a lot to showcase how much of a legendary figure Kiryu truly is. These characters know about the legendary Dragon of Dojima. They know how much he was respected, even the villains respect him to some extent. He's the walking legacy of the Tojo clan. As for Ebina himself, I think he's a fine villain. He doesn't break the mold in any real interesting way, and yet I do find myself enjoying the stuff surrounding him, unlike Bryce. He feels very traditional Yakuza villain in a way, and if this is the last time we're going to do a story that's traditional Yakuza-y, then I suppose he's the best possible villain we could end on at this point. I don't think he's perfect, him being the secret son of Arakawa is just a bit odd to be honest, but him genuinely hating the Yakuza with such a fervor that he's willing to become one of them to destroy them from the inside even after they've dissolved it's actually pretty fun. Although I think his overall plan is pretty shit, so let me get this straight. Ebina took over the Yakuza in order to give them jobs on the surface, helping dispose of waste because getting a job at a normal company is hard. And he destroyed the 3Jima security company because that would have been an alternative for them that wouldn't have allowed him to basically condemn them all to LA Island. Because he just hates them so much he'd rather send them to his own personal Hell Island so he could do with them what he pleases. Basically Yakuza genocide. Just, what? Maybe I'm just stupid, but this plan seems rather silly. But in a way, seeing how the cards have fallen for the Yakuza has given Kiryu time to reflect as well. Him acknowledging that pretty much a good 70% of the series was because he ran away, because he didn't try to change the Tojo clan from the inside when he was the 4th chairman, and because of that people like Ebina, Eiji, and others got hurt. This is something I wish the series would have done a lot sooner, but well. Kiryu's ending is neat though. He dons the old suit, basically reclaiming his name as Kazuma Kiryu and his identity as the Dragon of Dojima. We get to hear a remix of Receive You and climb the Millennium Tower once more as we get to even fight briefly alongside old comrades. And in the final boss, his body model is his traditional buff model instead of a skinnier model seen throughout the game. Like throughout the journey, he managed to regain the will to live. A reason to live to see tomorrow, and thanks to that, the dragon was truly resurrected for what might be his final outing as he's accepting every mistake he's made and accepting all the hurt that's caused. I say might be final entry because despite looking the way he does at the end of the game, I don't feel like the series will ever truly be rid of him. I'm sure he'll be in 9 in some way even if he's not playable. Though who knows, maybe he'll return as a party member at some point in the future. I mean, I wouldn't complain, he's pretty fun to play. I know some people are probably upset that the three Jimas don't get on the helicopter with the party at the very end to take Kiryu to the hospital, and honestly, I can't blame you if you are upset about that, because it's very confusing. But at the same time, I respect that these newfound friends Kiryu made stayed by his side all through that. I do wish that his old friends like Date and the three Jimas were there too. It feels like they got sidelined for no reason after making a really great return in the finale and having relevance throughout Kiryu's story in the series. I wish we could have focused on all of that a bit more, because I do think Kiryu's ending is abrupt, since his fate doesn't really feel truly final, despite the game feeling final for him a lot of the time. If they kill him off screen, I'm gonna be pissed, since we never see him reunite with the kids or Haruka. It's only implied. The game keeps teasing reunions and pulling the rug out from under you, and while I get the idea behind it for stuff like the side content, I do think if you're going to tease these reunions in the main story, then you should probably just go through with them, especially if this is Kiryu's final game. I could probably spend the next hour and a half analyzing every minute detail about Infinite Wealth's story that I liked and disliked, but I feel like I got my main points across. Sorry if this segment feels a little disjointed and not great. It's my first time writing something like this, and I just wanted to put into words how I feel about this game and its various plot points to some extent. I'm not sure I'm really cut out for in-depth analysis writing, and I don't know if words will ever actually truly describe how I feel about Infinite Wealth, but I've at least given it my best shot. I find Infinite Wealth is a game that you genuinely take something away from it when you walk away. Kiryu's side of the story especially left me with a better understanding to enjoy the time you have left, because you never know when your clock is going to start to run out. I think the game does a good job showcasing that the bonds you establish with the people around you are important, and that it's okay to rely on others, and I think this is a great message, especially using a character like Kazuma Kiryu to do it. You're no less of a man if you share your struggle with others. If anything, it makes you more of a man to admit when you need help. But even Ichiban's side of the story leaves you with something. Compassion. Caring about those around you matters a lot, but even caring about those around you may only have a one-off encounter with matters too. You never know how a simple good morning or hello to someone you pass by could positively impact their day, especially when they might be having a bad one. Care about those around you and those you have yet to meet, and I like that as a message. At least that's what I took away from it. So at the end of the day, what do I think of Infinite Wealth overall? I'm not the type of reviewer to give a score to a game, because I think every game you touch is going to give you an experience that is unique to you. A game you like might not be a game I like. But for me, I think the journey of Infinite Wealth is worth the time investment and the asking price. I hope this video got my overall feelings across on Infinite Wealth. I'm just a guy. I feel like I have a lot of personal feelings towards this game that I wanted to convey in this video, and I hope you enjoyed watching, or at least got something out of all of this. I tried my best, and I hope it was good enough. And that you have a wonderful day. Who knows? Maybe I'll make another one of these someday, like when Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii comes out, or on other games in the future. I haven't really decided yet, but I've got a few ideas cooking in my head, on top of a lot of Dokapon Kingdom still left at it. But until the day we meet again, I hope you have a good one, and thank you, again, for watching. Hey, I wanted to do a little bit of a post-mortem for this video. I'm recording this after I've edited the entire thing, and I'm just adding this as the last thing. I've reviewed the entire video and made my improvements and stuff like that. This video has been the last 3 months of my life, roughly. I started writing it in December of 2024. Although I guess technically it's probably been, over a year of my life, because I wrote a version of this video back in February of 2024. When the game came out, because I was intending to do this video back then, because the game was still fresh. I didn't end up doing that. I ended up just not finding the time to do it, but I decided to hunker down and get it done. I don't think this video is perfect. I don't think my script was perfect. I had rewritten this half a dozen times. I mentioned it at the start of this video, but I'm happy with how it came out. I don't think this video is great. I'd even hesitate to call it good, but I'd at least say that, for a first attempt making a video this long in this type of style, this was a good enough attempt. I think I can only get better from here. I made some mistakes, like my audio recording. I did it in multiple days, because it was I think a 16-page script, so I was okay, I'll record 5 pages per day. And you can kind of tell my audio, my mic, the position where it was changed a couple of times, and so I sound a bit different in certain sections, and then I also had to re-record certain sections. I made this one mistake where For some reason, I thought Yokoyama didn't work on Yakuza 1, so I originally recorded that segment saying, oh, he's only been with the series since Yakuza 2, which is wrong, because he actually was a part of Yakuza 1. I missed it because I saw Sonic Riders, and for some reason my brain just, like, straight up blanked. But, I had fun making this one. I have some other games I'd like to cover. I have, like, all of, like, East 10, for example. I recorded my entire playthrough of that. I'd like to talk about that game. I don't know if I'll get around to it. I don't know if it would even be as long as this video. I'm working on a Daybreak 2 video. I haven't beat Daybreak 2 yet, but I have a quite extensive history of the series, so I definitely want to sit down and do a comprehensive, analysis and discussion. Way more comprehensive than Infinite Wealth, because this was basically just my general thoughts on the story and my complaints and the stuff I liked, not like a chapter-by-chapter breakdown. I might do that for Daybreak 2 instead, because I feel like I'm better equipped to handle something like that. But yeah, I hope you ended up enjoying watching this video. I hope it was enjoyable watching. It's like 55 minutes. I'll be surprised if anybody even makes it to this section of the video where I'm talking about it. But I still appreciate you watching this if you made it this far. Hopefully I do more of these in the future. I'm not entirely sure what channel I'm putting it on, whether it's going to be my like main channel or if it's going to be like a whole new channel dedicated solely to videos like this. I'm not entirely sure how often I'll do these. My goal is to do one every 3 months, but I don't really think that's realistic, especially if I do like longer videos than this one. I suppose we'll see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I really want to mention here at the end, but I don't really think I'm not really coming up with anything, so I think I'm just going to wrap it up there. Until the next one, hope you take it easy. Farewell.